An 11-year-old boy found a fainted pilot in the cockpit, and his actions saved hundreds of lives. The deafening roar of jet engines echoed through the terminal, but for 11-year-old Alex, it was a symphony. His blue eyes sparkled with excitement as he pressed his nose against the glass window, watching a Boeing 777 taxi down the runway. "Mom, look, it's a 777. Did you know it can carry over 550 passengers?" he exclaimed, his voice overflowing with enthusiasm. Sarah smiled nervously, adjusting the strap of her purse. "Yes, honey, it's impressive." She glanced at her watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Their flight, Alex's first, would be departing soon. JFK International Airport buzzed with activity. Travelers from all corners of the globe moved like ants in a giant anthill. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the characteristic scent of ozone from the air conditioning systems. Announcements in English and Spanish echoed through the loudspeakers, creating a cacophony of sounds that, to Alex, was more exciting than any amusement park. "Come on, Alex." "We need to go through security," Sarah said, gently pulling her son by the hand. Alex reluctantly pulled himself away from the window, but his eyes continued to dart back and forth, absorbing every detail. In the security line, Alex fidgeted restlessly. "Mom, did you know that metal detectors use an electromagnetic field to detect metal objects?" "It's like a giant magnet." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. It was their first flight together since Alex's father had passed away 2 years prior. She knew how much her son loved airplanes, but the thought of being thousands of feet above the ground made her nervous. As they passed through security, a grey-haired woman watched Alex with a nostalgic smile. Elizabeth, 65, couldn't take her eyes off the enthusiastic boy. Her heart ached with a mixture of joy and sadness. Michael loved airplanes too, she murmured to herself, memories flooding her mind like a gentle yet relentless wave. Flashback. A 12-year-old boy ran across the backyard with his arms outstretched, imitating the sound of an airplane. "Mom! One day I'm going to fly one of those," Michael shouted, his eyes shining with the same enthusiasm Elizabeth now saw in Alex. The memory was so vivid that for a moment, Elizabeth could smell the freshly cut grass and hear her son's carefree laughter. Back in the present, Elizabeth discreetly wiped away a tear. Michael would never realize his dream. A car accident 5 years ago had stolen not only his life, but also Elizabeth's dreams of seeing her son fly. Meanwhile, Alex and Sarah finally arrived at their gate. The boy ran to the window, gazing in wonder at the aircraft that would take them to their destination. "Wow, it's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Did you know it's made mostly of composite materials, making it lighter and more fuel efficient?" Alex spouted facts, his excitement palpable. Sarah smiled, despite her nervousness. "How do you know all this, kind sweetheart?" "I read a lot, Mom, and I watch every documentary I can," Alex replied, his eyes glued to the aircraft. The boarding process began, and Alex could barely contain his excitement. He carefully observed each crew member, especially fascinated by the pilot greeting passengers at the aircraft's entrance. Captain Jones, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and experienced eyes, noticed Alex's interest. "First time flying, young man?" Alex nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir." "It's a dream come true," Captain Jones smiled. "Well, you're in good hands. I've got 30 years of experience, and this baby here," he patted the aircraft's wall affectionately, "is one of the safest and most advanced machines in the sky." As Alex and Sarah settled into their seats, the boy couldn't stop talking about the aircraft's features, the training required to become a pilot, and 1,000 other details he had absorbed in his studies. A few rows back, Elizabeth settled into her seat, her eyes occasionally drifting towards Alex. She couldn't help but think about how curious fate was. Here she was, about to take the trip her Michael had dreamed of, next to a boy who was the mirror image of her lost son. As the last passengers boarded and the crew prepared for takeoff, an atmosphere of anticipation hung in the air. For most, it was just another flight. For Alex, it was the beginning of a grand adventure. For Sarah, a test of courage. And for Elizabeth, a bittersweet journey of memories and perhaps healing. What none of them knew was that this flight would be much more than any of them could imagine. As the plane prepared for takeoff, fate had already charted a course that would change their lives forever. Alex's heart pounded as the plane taxied down the runway. His eager eyes watched every movement, every light, every detail of the cockpit visible through the open door. Captain Jones's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing the imminent takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for takeoff. Cabin crew, please take your seats for takeoff." Alex gripped the armrests, not out of fear, but pure excitement. The roar of the engines intensified, and he felt the vibration course through his body. The plane began to accelerate, gently pushing him back against his seat. "Mom, we're reaching V1 speed," Alex exclaimed, his eyes shining. "That's the decision speed, the point where the pilot has to decide whether to continue the takeoff or abort." Sarah smiled nervously, gripping the armrest. Is it really, honey?" The speed increased, and Alex narrated each stage like a seasoned commentator. "Now it's the rotation, the nose is lifting." With a slight jolt, the wheels left the ground. Alex let out a cry of pure joy as he felt the plane detach from the earth. Through the window, he saw the ground receding rapidly, houses and cars transforming into miniatures. "Amazing, isn't it?" Alex said, turning to his mother. Sarah, a little pale, nodded, trying to share her son's enthusiasm. As the plane gained altitude, Alex began to excitedly explain the function of the aircraft's different components. "Look, Mom, now the flaps are retracting. They help the plane gain lift during takeoff, but they create a lot of drag at high speeds." Sarah, gradually calming down, was impressed with her son's knowledge. "How do you know all this, Alex?" "Oh, I read a lot about airplanes, and I watch all the videos I can," he replied proudly. "Did you know this Boeing 787 has more efficient engines than previous models? They save up to 20% on fuel." At that moment, a soft voice interrupted their conversation. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. It's fascinating to see a young man so passionate about aviation." Alex and Sarah turned to see Elizabeth, the grey-haired woman, smiling kindly at them from the aisle seat. "Hello," Sarah said, returning the smile. "I'm Sarah, and this is my son, Alex." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Elizabeth replied. "Your son reminds me so much of my own when he was his age. He loved airplanes too." Alex, momentarily distracted from his observation of the wing, asked excitedly, "Is your son a pilot now?" A shadow crossed Elizabeth's face, but she maintained her smile. "No, dear. He didn't get the chance." Noticing the change in tone, Sarah quickly changed the subject. "Is this your first time flying on this type of aircraft?" "Mrs. Elizabeth," she finished. "And no, I've flown on it a few times, but I confess I've never really understood how it all works." Alex's eyes lit up at the opportunity to share his knowledge. "Oh, I can explain. You see, the engines." As Alex enthusiastically detailed the aircraft's systems, the flight continued smoothly. Elizabeth listened attentively, asking occasional questions that made the boy beam. Suddenly, the plane shuddered slightly. Alex stopped mid-sentence about hydraulic systems, his eyes widening with excitement. Turbulence. Around them, some passengers let out small cries of surprise. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Jones's voice came over the loudspeakers, "we're encountering a small area of turbulence. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Alex watched everything with fascination. "This is normal," he assured his mother and Elizabeth, who seemed a bit apprehensive. "Turbulence is caused by irregular air currents in the atmosphere. The plane is designed to handle it easily." As the plane continued to shake gently, Alex noticed movement in the aisle. A flight attendant hurried past, her normally smiling face now tense and worried. She whispered something to a colleague, who immediately headed towards the front of the plane. Alex frowned, his curious mind immediately alert. Something about the crew's behavior didn't seem normal. He watched carefully as another crew member emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of poorly concealed concern. "Mom," Alex whispered, leaning towards Sarah, "I think something's wrong." Sarah, still a little tense from the turbulence, looked at her son with concern. "What do you mean, honey?" Alex discreetly pointed to the crew's movements. Look how they're acting. This isn't standard procedure for normal turbulence. Elizabeth, overhearing the conversation, leaned forward. Are you sure, Alex? Maybe they're just being cautious. Alex shook his head, his eyes never leaving the aisle. No, there's something different. The way they're moving, their expressions. Something's not right. As the three of them watched, the turbulence began to subside. But Alex's unease only grew. His love of airplanes and his extensive knowledge told him that something out of the ordinary was happening. What Alex didn't know was that his intuition was correct. In the cockpit, a critical situation was developing, one that would soon demand courage and knowledge beyond his years. The adventure Alex had so longed for was about to become much more real and dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The turbulence had subsided, but Alex's unease only intensified. He couldn't take his eyes off the flight attendants' frantic movements. His stomach clenched, a mix of anxiety and a more prosaic need. "Mom," Alex whispered, tugging on Sarah's sleeve, "I need to use the restroom." Sarah frowned, glancing at the still illuminated fasten seatbelt sign. "Are you sure you can't wait, honey? The sign is still on." Alex shook his head vigorously. "It's urgent, Mom, please." Sighing, Sarah nodded. "All right, but be quick and careful." With a nod to Elizabeth, Alex stood, feeling the plane sway slightly beneath his feet. He moved down the narrow aisle, his hands brushing the seatbacks for balance. The aisle seemed endless, illuminated by fluorescent lighting that cast a surreal glow on everything. Alex passed tense passengers, some sleeping, others reading or watching movies on small screens. With each step, he felt the slight sway of the plane, a constant reminder that they were suspended thousands of feet in the air. As he approached the front of the plane, Alex noticed that the curtain separating economy class from business class was partially open. Through the gap, he could see the cockpit door. His heart quickened with the proximity of the cockpit, the command center that so fascinated him. That's when he heard it. A muffled sound, different from the constant hum of the engines or the murmur of the passengers. It was a sound of struggling. Alex stopped, his body tensing with sudden adrenaline. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was definitely a groan followed by a dull thud. Alex's eyes widened as he realized the sound was coming from the cockpit. Driven by curiosity and fear, Alex silently approached the cockpit door. His heart was beating so hard he was afraid someone might hear it. The cockpit door was slightly ajar, something Alex knew was highly unusual. Through the crack, he could see inside the cockpit, a paradise of buttons, screens, and controls that would normally leave him ecstatic. But what he saw made his blood run cold. Captain Jones was slumped over the controls, motionless. His body leaned to one side, his face pale, and his eyes closed. The first officer was nowhere in sight. Alex stifled a cry, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The pilot, the man responsible for keeping them safe in the air, was unconscious. For a moment, Alex was paralyzed, unable to move or think. Fear threatened to engulf him, but something stronger emerged from within. A voice in his mind, reminding him of all the facts and procedures he had obsessively studied. "Stay calm," Alex murmured to himself, his hands trembling. "Think." He knew he needed to act, but what should he do? Call a flight attendant? Try to wake the pilot? His mind raced with possibilities and dangers. At that moment, the plane lurched again, more violently this time. Alex lost his balance, nearly falling. The movement snapped him out of his trance. "Mom," he thought, "I need to tell Mom." With one last terrified look at the unconscious pilot, Alex turned and began to run down the aisle. He barely registered the surprised looks of the passengers as he passed, his body on autopilot, driven by fear and urgency. "Alex!" Sarah exclaimed when she saw him arrive, breathless. "What happened? Are you all right?" Elizabeth leaned in, her face etched with concern at the sight of the boy's state. "Mom," Alex gasped, struggling to catch his breath. His hands trembled as he clutched the armrest. "The pilot, Calm down, honey," Sarah said, pulling Alex closer. "Take a deep breath. What about the pilot?" Alex closed his eyes for a moment, trying to compose himself. When he opened them again, they were filled with fear and determination. "The pilot is unconscious," he finally said, his voice low but firm. I saw him through the cockpit door. He slumped over the controls. Sarah and Elizabeth exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Alex, are you sure? Elizabeth asked gently. Maybe you saw wrong. Alex shook his head vigorously. No, I'm sure. The door was slightly open. I saw it clearly. Captain Jones is unconscious, and the first officer isn't there. Sarah paled, her own fear battling with the need to comfort her son. Oh my God, she murmured. What do we do? Alex asked, looking from his mother to Elizabeth. We have to help somehow. Elizabeth, surprisingly, seemed the calmest of the three. She placed a comforting hand on Alex's shoulder. First, we need to be certain we can't cause unnecessary panic. Sarah nodded slowly, regaining some of her composure. Elizabeth is right. Alex, you need to show us exactly what you saw. Alex swallowed hard, fear still visible in his eyes, but he nodded bravely. Okay, let's go. As the three of them discreetly rose from their seats, the plane continued its seemingly normal flight. The other passengers, oblivious to the unfolding drama, continued their routine activities. Alex led the way down the aisle, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that what they found would change everything. The adventure he had so longed for was about to become a fight for survival, testing not only his knowledge but his courage in a way he never imagined. The airplane aisle seemed endless as Alex, Sarah, and Elizabeth cautiously made their way forward. The hum of the engines, once a comforting sound to Alex, now seemed ominous. Sarah held her son's hand tightly, her eyes revealing a mixture of fear and disbelief. Alex, Sarah whispered, leaning towards her son, are you absolutely sure of what you saw? This is very serious. Alex nodded vigorously, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. I'm sure, Mum. I saw Captain Jones slumped over the controls. Elizabeth, walking just behind them, maintained a calm expression, though her alert eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Let's check without alarming anyone, she murmured. If it's true, we'll need to act cautiously. As they neared the front of the plane, the tension was palpable. Alex felt his heart beating so hard he was sure others could hear it. Each step brought them closer to the truth, a truth that could change the fate of everyone on board. Reaching the curtain that separated the classes, Alex stopped abruptly. It's here, he whispered, pointing to the cockpit door a few meters ahead. Sarah and Elizabeth exchanged apprehensive glances. The reality of the situation was beginning to weigh on them. If Alex was right, the lives of all the passengers were in imminent danger. I'll look, Sarah finally said, her voice trembling but determined. She took a step forward, but Alex held her back. No, Mom, let me go. I already know what to expect. Before Sarah could protest, Alex had already slipped through the curtain. With silent steps, he approached the cockpit door, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was still slightly ajar, exactly as he had left it. With one last look at his mother and Elizabeth, who were watching anxiously, Alex peeked through the crack. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Captain Jones remained motionless, slumped over the controls. The first officer was still absent. The instruments on the panel blinked silently, oblivious to the unfolding crisis. Alex felt a wave of nausea and fear wash over him. He recoiled, quickly returning to where his mother and Elizabeth waited. It's true, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The pilot is still unconscious, and there's no sign of the first officer. Sarah brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a cry. Elizabeth, in turn, maintained her composure, though her eyes widened with the confirmation. We need to alert the crew, Elizabeth said firmly. They must have a protocol for situations like this. At that moment, a flight attendant hurried past them, heading towards the cockpit. He stopped when he saw the trio standing there, an expression of surprise and concern crossing his face. Has something happened? He asked, his voice professional but tense. Sarah, recovering from the initial shock, stepped forward. The pilot, she began, struggling to keep her voice low. He needs help. The flight attendant paled visibly. Without a word, he turned and ran to the cockpit, disappearing through the slightly open door. The seconds that followed seemed like an eternity. Alex, Sarah, and Elizabeth stood frozen, waiting. The silence was broken by a muffled shout from the cockpit, followed by frantic activity. Suddenly, the curtain behind them opened. Other passengers, drawn by the commotion, began to rise from their seats, curious and concerned. "What's happening?" a woman asked, her voice trembling with fear. "Is there something wrong with the plane?" another passenger questioned, panic evident in his voice. The news spread rapidly through the plane like wildfire. Anxious whispers turned into loud, frightened voices. Fear was contagious, and soon the entire plane was in an uproar. "Calm down, please." Elizabeth raised her voice, trying to restore order. "We don't know exactly what's happening. Let's wait for information from the crew." But her words were swallowed by the growing panic. Some passengers began to stand, moving towards the front of the plane, demanding answers. Alex watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. Part of him wanted to shout the truth, to tell everyone what he had seen. But another part, the part that had studied countless emergency procedures, knew that mass panic would only make the situation worse. At that moment, the flight attendant's voice came over the loudspeakers, tense but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing a minor technical difficulty, but the situation is under control. Please remain calm and await further instructions." The words, intended to calm, had the opposite effect. The flight attendant's forcedly calm tone only confirmed the passengers' suspicions that something was terribly wrong. Sarah pulled Alex close, hugging him protectively. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, more to herself than to the others. Elizabeth, surprisingly, seemed the most composed of the three. "Let's go back to our seats," she said firmly. "We can't do anything here, and we're only hindering the crew." As they moved back through the now agitated aisles, Alex couldn't help but think. His knowledge of airplanes, his passion for flying, all seemed small and insignificant in the face of the terrifying reality they faced. But a small voice inside him, the same voice that made him memorize flight manuals and study every detail of airplanes, whispered that just maybe, he could make a difference. As he sat down, fastening his seatbelt as instructed, Alex knew that this wasn't just a crisis. It was a test of courage, knowledge, and determination, and somehow he knew he was about to face the biggest challenge of his young life. Chaos spread through the plane like a relentless wave. Screams of panic and muffled sobs filled the air as the flight attendants struggled to maintain order. Alex watched everything with a mixture of fear and growing determination. His mind raced, analyzing every detail he had ever studied about in-flight emergency situations. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. Alex turned to his mother and Elizabeth, who were tense in their seats. "The radio!" he exclaimed, his eyes shining with sudden realization. "We need to use the cockpit radio to call for help." Sarah looked at her son, confused and worried. "Alex, honey, the crew must already be doing that." Elizabeth, however, leaned forward, intrigued. "Well, how do you know about the radio, Alex?" The boy took a deep breath, memories flooding his mind. Flashback. 9-year-old Alex sat in front of the computer, eyes glued to the screen. His hands moved skillfully over the keyboard and joystick, piloting a virtual plane through a storm. "Mayday, mayday," he spoke into the microphone, imitating the voice of an experienced pilot. "This is Flight 2473, requesting emergency guidance." Hours passed as he played, not just for fun, but studying every procedure, memorizing every protocol. Next to the computer, a stack of books on aviation and technical manuals, all well-worn and marked. End of flashback. "I studied this," Alex explained quickly. "I know how the communication system works. If the pilot is incapacitated, someone needs to contact air traffic control." Sarah and Elizabeth exchanged astonished glances. The determination on Alex's face was undeniable. "But Alex," Sarah began, her voice trembling, "you're just a child. How could we—" Before she could finish, a strong jolt shook the plane. Screams of terror echoed through the cabin. It was the decisive moment. "We have no choice," Elizabeth said firmly. "Alex might be our best chance." With a silent decision, the three of them stood up and began moving towards the cockpit. The chaos around them provided the perfect distraction. Upon reaching the cockpit door, they found it still ajar. With a determined look at his mother and Elizabeth, Alex pushed the door open and entered. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking, even in that critical situation. The control panel, a symphony of lights, buttons, and dials, blinked and hummed. Screens displayed a profusion of altitude, speed, GPS coordinates. Captain Jones was still unconscious, now moved to the first officer's seat by a flight attendant who looked completely lost in front of the controls. "What are you doing here?" the flight attendant shouted, panic evident in his voice. "Go back to your seats." Alex ignored the man, his eyes scanning the panel until he found what he was looking for, the radio. "I know what to do," Alex said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Let me use the radio." The flight attendant looked incredulously at the boy, but before he could protest, Elizabeth intervened. "Please," she pleaded, "let him try. He knows about airplanes." Hesitantly, the flight attendant stepped aside, allowing Alex to approach the panel. With slightly trembling hands, Alex picked up the microphone. He took a deep breath, remembering all the procedures he had studied. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," he spoke, his voice young but clear. "This is American Airlines Flight 2473. We have an emergency on board." For a moment, there was only static. Then a male voice responded, "Flight 2473, this is New York Air Traffic Control. What is the nature of your emergency?" Alex swallowed hard before answering. "The pilot is unconscious, and the first officer is missing. There's no one qualified to fly the plane." There was a tense pause before the controller responded, his voice now clearly alarmed. "Understood. 2473. Who is this? Where is the crew?" "My name is Alex," the boy replied, feeling the weight of the situation. I'm a passenger. I'm 11 years old." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex could imagine the controller's shock on the other end. "Alex?" The voice finally returned, now softer. "You're doing an amazing job. Can you tell me your current altitude and position?" With growing confidence, Alex consulted the instruments. "We're at 36,000 feet, latitude 42 degrees Cha, longitude 74 degrees Bios, heading northeast." "Excellent, Alex," the controller replied, relief evident in his voice. "I'm going to guide you through this. Have you ever flown a plane before?" Alex hesitated for a moment. "Usually in simulators," he admitted, "but I've studied a lot about airplanes. I know how the controls work." "That's great, Alex. We're going to use that knowledge. First, we need to keep the plane stable. Can you see the yoke in front of the pilot's seat?" Alex looked at the large steering wheel in front of him. "Yes, I can see it." "Good. Now listen carefully. I'm going to guide you step by step." As Alex began to receive instructions, Sarah and Elizabeth watched with a mixture of fear and admiration. The boy who just minutes ago was merely fascinated by airplanes was now becoming the only hope of survival for everyone on board. The plane continued its flight through the night sky, carrying not only passengers, but also the weight of everyone's hopes and fears. And at the center of it all, an 11-year-old boy suddenly transformed into the unlikely hero of this extraordinary story. The air traffic controller's voice echoed in the cockpit, mingling with the constant hum of the engines. Alex, eyes fixed on the control panel, absorbed every word with an intensity surprising for someone so young. "Alex, you're doing a great job," the controller's reassuring voice came over the radio. "Now, let's start with the basics. Can you see the altimeter?" Alex's eyes scanned the panel, quickly locating the mentioned instrument. "Yes, sir. We're at 36,000 feet. "Excellent. Maintain that altitude for now. Now look at the artificial horizon. It's an instrument that shows the plane's position relative to the horizon." Alex nodded. Even though he knew the controller couldn't see him, his hands were sweating, but his voice remained steady. "Understood. The plane is level now." As Alex received instructions, his mind momentarily wandered back to the countless hours he had spent studying. Flashback. Alex sat on his bed, surrounded by aviation manuals. His fingers traced diagrams of cockpits, memorizing the function of each button and lever. He muttered to himself, "Artificial horizon shows the plane's attitude. Altimeter indicates altitude. Airspeed indicator." His mother, Sarah, appeared at the bedroom door. "Alex, it's late. You need to sleep. Just a little longer, Mum, he pleaded, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. I'm almost understanding how the autopilot works, Sarah sighed, a loving smile on her lips. All right, 10 more minutes. But remember, you have school tomorrow. Alex barely heard, already immersed again in his study. End of flashback. The controller's voice brought Alex back to the present. Now, Alex, we need to check the fuel. Can you see the fuel gauge? Alex located the gauge. Yes, sir, it shows we have enough fuel for about 3 more hours of flight. Great job, Alex. You're doing better than many adults would in this situation. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, Sarah and Elizabeth faced an equally challenging task, maintaining calm among the increasingly agitated passengers. Sarah, with tears in her eyes but determination in her voice, addressed the nearby passengers. Please remain calm. My son, he knows about airplanes. He's talking to air traffic control right now. A murmur of disbelief went through the cabin. A child, someone shouted. We're trusting our lives to a child. Elizabeth intervened, her voice firm and reassuring. That child may be our best chance right now. He has knowledge and is being guided by professionals on the ground. The best thing we can do is stay calm and trust. Her words seemed to have some effect, momentarily calming the heightened emotions. Back in the cockpit, Alex continued to receive instructions. The controller patiently and clearly guided him through the basic flight procedures, explaining each step. Alex, now we need to adjust our course slightly. Do you see the heading indicator? Another flashback invaded Alex's mind. Flashback. Alex watched a documentary about air crashes, absorbing every detail. The narrator explained, in emergency situations, maintaining the correct course is crucial. The heading indicator or directional gyro is essential for... Alex paused the video, furiously scribbling notes in his notebook, already filled with aviation information. End of flashback. Yes, I see the indicator, Alex replied, his voice more confident now. We're at 45 degrees. Very good. Let's adjust to 50 degrees. Gently turn the yoke to the right until the indicator reads 050. Carefully, Alex made the adjustment, feeling the plane respond to his command. A wave of adrenaline coursed through him, mixed with a twinge of fear. The reality of the situation was beginning to weigh on him. In the passenger cabin, news that an 11-year-old boy was at the controls spread quickly. Reactions ranged from panic to a strange form of hope. A businessman, his impeccable suit now crumpled from stress, turned to Sarah. Your son, does he really know what he's doing? Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding, her voice trembling slightly. He's always been passionate about airplanes. He's studied a lot about them. If anyone can help us now, it's him. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Some passengers prayed silently. Others clung to the armrests, their knuckles white with tension. In the cockpit, Alex continued to follow the controller's instructions, his concentration intense. Every movement of the yoke, every adjustment to the controls, was made with meticulous care. You're doing very well, Alex, the controller's voice came through, reassuring. Now let's start planning for an emergency landing. Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. Landing. The most critical and dangerous part of any flight, especially in an emergency situation like this. He took a deep breath, remembering all the times he had landed in his simulator at home. But this wasn't a game. This was real. Hundreds of lives depended on him now. I'm ready, Alex said, his voice firm despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. As the controller began to explain the emergency landing procedures, Alex felt the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. But along with the fear, there was determination. He had been preparing for this unknowingly for years. Now it was time to put all that knowledge into practice. The plane continued its flight through the night sky, carrying not only passengers but hopes, fears, and the fate of everyone on board in the hands of an unlikely 11-year-old hero. A low moan cut through the constant drone of the engines and the tense hum of the cabin. Alex, focused on the air traffic controller's instructions, almost didn't notice. But Sarah, anxiously watching her son's every move, noticed immediately. Alex, she whispered urgently. The pilot, I think he's waking up. Alex's eyes widened, momentarily shifting from the instruments to Captain Jones. The experienced pilot was beginning to stir, his eyelids fluttering as he struggled to regain consciousness. "Sir," Alex spoke into the radio, "the pilot is waking up. What should I do?" The controller's voice sounded calm, but with a clear note of relief. "That's great, Alex. Stay on the controls for now. Let's see how he's doing." Captain Jones groaned again, his eyes finally opening. He blinked several times, clearly disoriented. His gaze wandered around the cockpit, focusing and unfocusing, until it landed on Alex, sitting in the pilot's seat. "What? Where?" The captain's voice was hoarse, confused. He tried to sit up, but fell back into the seat, still weak. Alex, displaying surprising maturity, turned to the pilot while keeping one hand firmly on the controls. "Captain Jones, you fainted. We're in an emergency situation, but everything's under control. I'm in contact with air traffic control." Captain Jones stared at Alex, confusion giving way to an expression of utter shock. You're that boy from boarding," he murmured, his mind struggling to process the situation. "Yes, sir," Alex replied, his voice calm despite the evident tension in his shoulders. "My name is Alex. I took the controls when you fainted. There was no one else who could." The pilot looked around, noticing the absence of the first officer and the presence of Sarah and Elizabeth in the cockpit. Slowly, the reality of the situation began to sink in. How long was I out?" he asked, his voice gaining strength. "About 40 minutes, Captain," Elizabeth replied, offering him a glass of water. "Alex has been keeping the plane on course since then." Captain Jones drank the water greedily, his eyes never leaving Alex. The disbelief on his face was palpable. How do you know how to fly?" Alex blushed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I don't really know, sir. I've studied a lot about airplanes. I've been using flight simulators for years. The controller has been guiding me through the basic procedures." As if to confirm, the controller's voice came over the radio. "Captain Jones, this is New York Air Traffic Control. Good to hear your voice. How are you feeling?" The captain leaned towards the radio, still visibly shaken. I'm awake, but I feel weak. What happened?" "We suspect food poisoning, Captain," the controller replied. "The first officer was also affected and is being attended to at the back of the plane. Alex has been doing an incredible job keeping the plane stable." Captain Jones looked at Alex with a mixture of admiration and concern. "So I've actually been piloting this plane, kid?" Alex nodded, his eyes momentarily leaving the instruments to meet the pilot's. "Yes, sir, I couldn't let the plane crash. There were too many lives at risk." Captain Jones seemed to ponder for a moment, then made a move to get up. "Let me take over now, son. You've done more than anyone could have expected." But as he tried to move, the pilot stumbled, nearly falling. Alex, with surprising reflexes, reached out to steady him, while keeping his other hand firmly on the yoke. "Captain," Alex said, his voice gentle but firm, "I don't think you're in any condition to fly yet. Please, rest a little longer. I can continue for now." Captain Jones looked at Alex, then at the instruments, noting with astonishment that all the indicators showed a stable and controlled flight. Slowly, he leaned back in his seat, the realization of his own fragility and the boy's surprising competence settling in. "Yes, you're right, Alex," he finally said, his voice a mixture of admiration and resignation. Continue the good work. I'll watch you and help in any way I can." Alex nodded, returning his full attention to the controls. "Thank you, Captain, sir," he spoke into the radio. "Captain Jones is awake, but he's not in condition to take over yet." "What should I do now?" The controller's voice came back, reassuring as always. "You're doing an excellent job, Alex. Let's continue as we were. Captain Jones, if you can, please supervise and guide Alex as needed. Let's begin preparations for the emergency landing." As the controller began to detail the next steps, Captain Jones watched Alex with a newfound look of respect. This boy, with his passion for airplanes and his unlikely courage, had become the best hope for everyone on board. Sarah, watching the interaction between her son and the pilot, felt a wave of pride mixed with fear. Her little Alex, always fascinated by airplanes, was now actually piloting one. The irony of the situation didn't escape her, her son's dream coming true in the most unexpected and dangerous way possible. The plane continued its flight through the night, now guided by the small but steady hands of an 11-year-old boy, under the watchful eye of an experienced pilot and the constant guidance of ground control. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since the crisis began, a glimmer of hope began to form on the horizon. Captain Jones watched intently as Alex maneuvered the plane with intense concentration. The experienced pilot, still weak but more lucid by the minute, realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This boy, only 11 years old, was doing what many trained adults would struggle to accomplish. "Alex," the captain finally spoke, his voice hoarse but firm, "I need you to stay on the controls. I'll guide you, and together, we'll bring this plane down safely." Alex's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and determination. "Yes, go, sir." "What should I do?" Captain Jones shifted in his seat, leaning slightly to get a better view of the instruments. "First, give me a full instrument reading. Altitude, speed, heading, and fuel levels." Alex nodded, his eyes scanning the panel with surprising familiarity. Altitude, 32,000 feet. Speed, 450 knots. Heading, 045 degrees. Fuel remaining for approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes of flight. Captain Jones raised his eyebrows, impressed with the accuracy and confidence of Alex's report. "Excellent, son. Now, let's contact air traffic control and inform them of our current situation." Alex reached for the radio with a natural ease. "New York Control, this is Flight 2473. Captain Jones is awake and advising me. We request instructions for emergency landing procedures." The reply came swiftly. "Roger that. Flight 2473. Good to know. Captain Jones is assisting. We'll initiate procedures for an emergency landing at Stewart International Airport. It's the safest option considering your current position." Captain Jones nodded in approval. "Good choice. Alex, adjust our heading to 220 degrees. Let's begin our approach." Carefully, Alex turned the yoke, watching the heading indicator closely until they reached the correct course. Captain Jones observed every move, ready to intervene if necessary, but Alex executed the maneuver with surprising precision. "Impressive, Alex," the captain praised. "Where did you learn to do that?" Alex blushed slightly. "Flight simulators, sir. I've spent many hours practicing at home," Captain Jones smiled, a new appreciation dawning in his eyes. "Well, it seems those simulators are more useful than I thought." As they continued to work together, a unique dynamic began to develop between the experienced pilot and the young enthusiast. Captain Jones provided guidance and technical knowledge, while Alex demonstrated a natural aptitude and an intuitive understanding of the aircraft's systems. "Alex, we need to start reducing altitude," the captain instructed. "Let's descend to 25,000 feet. Do it gradually, no more than 1,000 feet per minute." Alex nodded, carefully adjusting the controls. He closely monitored the vertical speed indicator, ensuring a smooth and controlled descent. "New York Control," Alex called into the radio. "We're initiating our descent to 25,000 feet. "Roger that, Flight 2473, came the reply. "Maintain that heading and altitude for now. We're clearing the airspace for your approach." As the plane descended smoothly, Captain Jones began to explain the next steps. "Alex, the emergency landing will be the biggest challenge. We'll need to work in perfect synchronization. Can you handle it?" Alex looked at the captain, his eyes showing a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." Captain Jones smiled reassuringly. "You're doing great, son. Better than many pilots I've seen in emergency situations. Now let's review the landing procedures." In the following minutes, the captain guided Alex through the complex approach and landing procedures. They discussed approach speeds, flap configurations, and the use of the landing gear. "Remember," Alex and the captain emphasized, "landing is just a controlled flight towards the ground. Stay calm and follow my instructions, and we'll get through this." Alex absorbed every word, occasionally asking questions that surprised the captain with their insight. The cockpit, previously a scene of crisis, now resembled an unlikely classroom, with the veteran pilot passing on his knowledge to an exceptionally talented apprentice. As they neared Stewart International, the tension in the cabin increased. Sarah and Elizabeth, who had been silently observing the interaction between Alex and the captain, exchanged looks of concern and pride. "New York Control," Captain Jones called, his voice stronger now. "We're ready to begin final approach procedures. Request permission to descend to 15,000 feet. "Permission granted. Flight 2473, replied the controller. "The runway is being prepared for your emergency landing. Emergency vehicles are standing by." Captain Jones looked at Alex, who maintained an expression of intense concentration. "Ready for the hardest part, son." Alex swallowed hard, but nodded firmly. "Shine, I'm ready, Captain. Let's bring this plane home." With those words, pilot and apprentice began the final procedures for the emergency landing. The fate of everyone on board rested in the hands of this unlikely duo. An experienced pilot temporarily incapacitated, and an 11-year-old boy whose passion for airplanes was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. The plane began its final descent, carrying not only passengers, but also the hopes and fears of everyone on board, towards an outcome that no one could predict. The plane sliced through the night sky, descending towards the bright lights of Stewart International Airport. In the cockpit, Alex and Captain Jones worked in perfect synchronization, their eyes darting between the flight instruments and the view outside. "Altitude 10,000 feet, Alex announced, his voice tense but controlled. "Airspeed 150 knots. Captain Jones nodded, his hands poised to take control if necessary. "Good, Alex. Keep the nose slightly up." "We're almost there." Without guidance from air traffic control, they relied entirely on their own senses and skills. Alex constantly scanned the horizon, using the visual landmarks he had tirelessly studied. "I see the Hudson River to our right," Alex said, pointing. We should be about 5 miles from the runway threshold." Captain Jones was once again impressed with the boy's knowledge. "Excellent observation. Now, start reducing speed. Extend the flaps to the maximum position." Alex carefully adjusted the controls, feeling the plane respond. Air resistance increased, slowing the aircraft. The sound of the engines changed to a lower, steadier roar. As they approached the runway, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Each second felt like an eternity. Alex could feel sweat trickling down his back, his hands gripping the yoke tightly. 500 feet, Alex announced. "Landing gear down and locked." Captain Jones kept his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching runway. "Great job, Alex. Now comes the tricky part. Keep the plane aligned with the center of the runway." Alex made a slight adjustment to the yoke, correcting a small deviation caused by a gust of wind. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure the captain could hear it. 300 feet, 200 feet. Alex continued the announcements, his voice growing tenser with each number. The ground was rushing towards them. The runway lights were now bright lines streaking past the sides of the plane. Alex could see the details of the asphalt, the white markings. 100 feet, 50 feet. "Now, Alex," the captain shouted. Gently pull back on the yoke. With a smooth motion, the result of countless hours of practice on simulators, Alex pulled back on the yoke. The nose of the plane rose slightly, reducing the rate of descent. The first touchdown was gentle, almost imperceptible. The main wheels touched the asphalt with a squeak, followed immediately by the heavier thud of the nose gear. "Reverse thrust," the captain commanded. Alex activated the reverse thrusters, and the roar of the engines increased dramatically. The plane decelerated rapidly, the force of the braking pushing everyone forward in their seats. In the passenger cabin, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of applause and cries of relief. Sarah, tears streaming down her face, grabbed Elizabeth's hand. "He did it," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "My boy did it," Elizabeth smiled, her own eyes shining. "Yes, he did. What an incredible young man you have, Sarah." As the plane slowed, Alex maintained his focus, guiding the aircraft down the center of the runway. His eyes darted between the instruments and the view ahead, ensuring they stayed on course. Finally, After what seemed like an eternity, the plane slowed to taxiing speed. Alex let out a shaky breath, only now realizing he had been holding it. "Excellent work, son," Captain Jones said, his voice filled with admiration. "You just executed one of the most impressive landings I've ever seen in my entire career." Alex looked at the captain, a tired but radiant smile on his face. "We did it, didn't we? We actually landed." "Yes, Alex, we did. Thanks to you." As the plane taxied towards the terminal, escorted by emergency vehicles, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in for everyone on board. In the passenger cabin, the atmosphere was pure euphoria. Passengers hugged each other, some crying with relief, others laughing hysterically. The tension accumulated during the hours of crisis finally dissipated. Sarah and Elizabeth were surrounded by grateful passengers, all wanting to know more about the young hero who had saved their lives. "Your son is amazing," exclaimed an elderly woman, shaking Sarah's hand. "How did he learn to do that?" Sarah, still dazed by the emotion, just shook her head. He always loved airplanes. He studied everything about them." "It's a miracle," said another passenger. "A true miracle." When the plane finally stopped at the terminal, there was a moment of reverent silence. Then, Captain Jones's voice came over the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Jones speaking. I'd like to inform you that we have landed safely at Stewart International Airport. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to a very special passenger, without whom this landing would not have been possible. Alex, an 11-year-old boy, took the controls when I was incapacitated and brought us safely to the ground. He is the true hero of this flight." A fresh roar of applause erupted in the cabin. Passengers turned to Sarah, some reaching out to hug her, others clapping in her direction. In the cockpit, Alex finally allowed the tension to leave him. His hands trembled as he released the yoke. Tears of relief and exhaustion streamed down his face. Captain Jones placed a comforting hand on Alex's shoulder. "You were extraordinary, son. You saved hundreds of lives today. Never forget that." As the plane's doors finally opened, Alex and Captain Jones were greeted by a crowd of paramedics, airport officials, and, to Alex's surprise, reporters with cameras. Sarah rushed to the front of the plane, wrapping Alex in a tight hug as he emerged from the cockpit. "Oh, my love," she sobbed. "I'm so proud of you. So proud." Alex returned the hug, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. All the adrenaline, all the fear, and all the courage of the past few hours finally hit him, and he wept openly. As the passengers disembarked, many stopped to personally thank Alex. Hands were extended, hugs were given, words of gratitude were whispered. Elizabeth, watching the scene with tears in her eyes, couldn't help but think of her own son. "You would have been proud, Michael," she murmured to herself. "So proud." When the last passenger had disembarked, Alex looked back at the plane. The Boeing 787, so imposing in the air, now seemed almost delicate on the runway, its lights blinking softly in the night. "I actually did it," Alex whispered, half to himself. "I actually flew a real plane." Captain Jones, now receiving medical attention, made a point of calling Alex over one last time before being taken to the hospital. "Alex," he said, his voice hoarse but sincere, "you're not just a hero. You're a natural pilot. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As he was guided out of the terminal, surrounded by his mother, Elizabeth, and a crowd of grateful admirers, Alex knew his life would never be the same. The boy who dreamed of airplanes had become the boy who saved a plane, and as the camera lights flashed and the questions began to fly, Alex felt a new confidence grow within him. He had faced the greatest imaginable challenge and triumphed. The sky, he realized, was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning. Stewart International Airport buzzed with activity. Red and blue lights from emergency vehicles flashed incessantly, illuminating the night. Medical teams rushed back and forth, checking passengers and crew. Amidst this organized chaos, TV cameras and photographers jostled, all trying to capture the historic moment. Alex emerged from the plane, blinking in the bright lights. He barely had time to process the scene when he heard a familiar cry. "Alex!" Sarah rushed towards him, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her son in a tight hug, sobbing with relief and pride. "My brave boy," she murmured, stroking his hair. "You did it. You saved us all." Alex hugged her back tightly, finally allowing his own tears to fall. "Mom," he whispered. "I was so scared." "I know, honey," Sarah replied, pulling back slightly to look into her son's eyes. "But you were so brave, so incredible." At that moment, Captain Jones, supported by paramedics, approached the pair. His face was pale, but his eyes shone with admiration. "Mom," he said to Sarah, "your son is a hero. In all my years of flying, I've never seen anything like it." Turning to Alex, he continued, "Young man, you displayed courage and skill worthy of the best pilots I've ever known. Thank you for saving our lives." The captain's words were picked up by the press microphones, and soon a wave of reporters surrounded Alex and his mother. "Alex, how did it feel to fly a commercial airliner? Did you ever think about giving up? What gave you the courage to face this challenge?" Before Alex could answer, Elizabeth stepped forward, making her way through the reporters. "Give the boy some space," she said firmly. "He's just been through an incredible experience. Let him breathe." The passengers, now safe in the terminal, began sharing their stories with the press. "It was terrifying," said a middle-aged woman. "But that boy, he was so calm, so focused. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." A businessman added, "When we heard a child was flying us, I thought it was the end, but he proved me wrong. That kid's a prodigy." As the interviews continued, a group of men in suits approached. They were representatives of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. "Alex," one of them addressed the boy, "I'm the Director of Operations for the FAA. We'd like to hear your detailed account of the events." It's an unprecedented situation." Alex nodded, still slightly dazed by all the attention. He began to tell his story, detailing each decision, each maneuver. The officials listened intently, exchanging impressed glances. "Extraordinary," one of them murmured when Alex finished. "Simply extraordinary." At that moment, a representative from the Department of Transportation approached. "Alex," he said, a warm smile on his face, "in recognition of your exceptional courage and skill, we'd like to invite you to a special ceremony in Washington, D.C. The President would like to award you a Medal of Honor." Alex's eyes widened in surprise. I don't know what to say," he stammered. Sarah hugged her son's shoulders, tears of pride shining in her eyes. "Say yes, honey. You deserve it." Alex looked at his mother, at Captain Jones, at Elizabeth, and at all the grateful faces around him. A sense of accomplishment filled him, mixed with a deep humility. "Yes," he finally said, a small smile forming on his lips. "It would be an honor." As the cameras continued to flash and the questions continued to be asked, Alex knew his life had changed forever. The boy who dreamed of airplanes had become a national hero overnight. And as the sun began to rise on the horizon, bathing the airport in a golden glow, Alex understood that this was not the end of his journey. It was just the beginning of a new and exciting adventure. The East Room of the White House was filled with dignitaries, journalists, and special guests. American flags adorned the walls, and a podium bearing the presidential seal stood at the center of the stage. Alex, wearing a suit that seemed a little too big for his small frame, stood beside his mother, Sarah, both visibly nervous and excited. The President of the United States stepped up to the podium, his voice echoing through the silent room. "Today, we are here to honor an extraordinary young man. Alex, at just 11 years old, demonstrated courage and skill beyond his years, saving hundreds of lives in circumstances that would have challenged even the most seasoned professionals." Alex was called to the stage, his steps hesitant but determined. The President placed a medal around his neck, declaring, "It is with great honor that I award Alex the Medal of Valor and the title of Young Hero of American Aviation." The room erupted in applause. Sarah, tears in her eyes, watched her son with a mixture of pride and wonder. How had her little boy, who not long ago played with toy airplanes, become this young hero before the entire nation? After the ceremony, Captain Jones, now fully recovered, approached Alex with a warm smile. "Alex, your courage inspired me to do something more for aviation." I'm announcing the creation of the Wings of the Future program, an educational project for young people interested in aviation, and I'd like you to be our ambassador." Alex's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really, Captain? That would be amazing." Elizabeth, who had been invited as a witness to the heroic event, approached Sarah and Alex. Her face was serene, with a gentle smile. "Alex," she began, her voice choked with emotion, "I want you to know that your courage did more than save lives on that plane. It brought healing to my heart." She paused, wiping away a tear. "I lost my son a few years ago. He loved airplanes, just like you. Seeing you achieve what he dreamed of, it was like a part of him was alive again. Thank you for giving me hope again." Sarah hugged Elizabeth, forming an instant bond. Alex, touched by the story, promised himself that he would honor the memory of Elizabeth's son through his own accomplishments. Among the guests was the director of a prestigious flight school. He approached Alex with enthusiasm. "Young man, we'd like to invite you for a special visit to our institution. We believe you have a bright future in aviation, and we want to be a part of it." Alex could barely contain his excitement. "Thank you, sir, I'd love to." In the days that followed, Alex's story spread throughout the country. Schools invited him to speak, and children of all ages saw him as an inspiration. On one such visit to an elementary school, Alex found himself surrounded by a group of enthusiastic children. "How did you learn so much about airplanes?" asked a wide-eyed boy. Alex smiled, remembering his own motivations. "I always loved airplanes. I read everything I could, watched documentaries, played simulators. If you have a passion, follow it with all your heart." A shy girl raised her hand. "Do you think I could be a pilot someday too?" "Of course you can," Alex replied enthusiastically. "If you dream it, work hard and never give up. The sky's the limit." Watching this scene, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on her son's incredible journey. The boy who used to run around the house with arms outstretched, imitating the sound of airplane engines, was now inspiring a new generation of dreamers. That night, as Alex slept, exhausted after a long day of interviews and public appearances, Sarah sat beside his bed. She gently stroked her son's hair, marveling at his transformation. "My little hero," she whispered, "you've grown so much, not just in height, but in spirit. I'm so proud of the young man you're becoming." Alex stirred in his sleep, a small smile playing on his lips, as if dreaming of new adventures in the skies. Sarah quietly left the room, her heart filled with love and hope for the future. She knew that Alex's journey was just beginning, but she was certain that, no matter the challenges that lay ahead, her extraordinary son would be ready to face them, with the same courage and determination he had shown on that fateful night in the skies above America. The future stretched before them, as vast and full of possibilities as the very sky that Alex loved so much. 7 years passed since that fateful night. Alex, now a young man of 18, stood on the tarmac, his eyes fixed on the small Cessna airplane before him. His heart pounded, not with fear but with pure excitement. Today was the day of his first official solo flight. As he prepared, flashes of the past flooded his mind. The initial panic upon discovering the unconscious pilot, his trembling hands on the controls of a commercial airliner, the indescribable relief when the wheels touched down safely, the award ceremony, the gleam of the medal on his chest, each memory, a step on the ladder that had led him to this moment. Beside him, Captain Jones, now retired but still with that glint of adventure in his eyes, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ready, Alex?" asked the old pilot, a proud smile on his wrinkled face. Alex nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for his mentor. "More than ever, Captain." Not far away, Sarah and Elizabeth watched, both with tears in their eyes. Elizabeth, who over the years had become a second grandmother to Alex, squeezed Sarah's hand. "Your boy has grown into an incredible man," Elizabeth whispered. Sarah smiled, remembering the little boy fascinated by airplanes. "Yes, he has. And part of that is thanks to you, Elizabeth." Alex completed his final checks, each movement precise and confident. He climbed into the cockpit, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and avionics. He started the engine, the roar filling his ears like a sweet melody. As he taxied towards the runway, Alex couldn't help but think about how a single moment of courage had changed the course of his life. That night not only saved hundreds of lives, but inspired thousands of others. The Wings of the Future program, initiated by Captain Jones, had already trained dozens of young pilots, many inspired by Alex's story. The tower gave clearance, and Alex pushed the throttle forward. The small plane gained speed, racing down the runway. With a gentle pull on the yoke, the wheels left the ground. Alex was flying, this time alone, but carrying with him the lessons, the support and the love of all those who had helped him get there. As he gained altitude, the world opened up before him. The horizon, once a limit, was now an invitation. Alex smiled, feeling the freedom and responsibility that came with his newly earned wings. In the cockpit, with the endless blue sky before him, Alex knew this was just the first of many adventures. The boy who once saved a plane was now a man ready to explore new horizons, and as the sun glinted off his wings, Alex was certain of one thing. The sky would never again be the limit, only the beginning.